Hi guys, thanks for the introduction and the invite. Pleasure to be here talking to you. Slightly small session, and I suppose part of the reason might be because what I'm presenting here isn't quite conventional. But by the end of my session, you'll probably appreciate that in a few years' time, everybody working in the health industry is probably going to be dealing with this in some way or another. Will definitely be very aware of it. Okay. So getting rid of the boring stuff out of the way first, a little bit about myself. I'm a lecturer here at the moment in health, nutrition and exercise. I teach many aspects that fall within them words and terms. But my speciality, I suppose, is exercise and health. Registered nutritionist as well, but I'm not going to talk to you about nutrition today. And we can have a discussion about that another time. And also reps level 3 PT as well. So I know where a lot of you are coming from. Anybody got a decent timer on them? Basically, what I want you to do, set a timer for 30 minutes. And 30 minutes is going to go off, yeah? Yeah, alright. When it gets to 30 minutes, it goes off. Stick your hand up, or if I hear it, which I'm sure I will, then you'll realise what I've done now. Okay, but forget about that now for half an hour. Okay. So, start off with some eye-opening statistics. Like, this session is all about sitting time, right, which we now call the silent killer. Right. And I'll explain why. So, we know at the moment there's a lot of people in the country, many countries, being highly sedentary. They sit around a lot of the time. But what that means, right, is a massive increase in the risk of certain diseases, a high number of diseases, and all-cause mortality. So this is dying from any cause. If you have a high amount of sedentary time, you can increase your risk by 50%. Look how it increases. 90% increase in cardiovascular mortality. 112% increase in risk of diabetes. And most staggering, 150% pretty much increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's comparing the most sedentary individuals in the population to the least sedentary. Right. But it can increase your risk by 150% possibly. So it's a massive, massive issue. Why are people sedentary? Well, I'm sure all of us can resonate with some of the images up here. We spend our time commuting, quite often public transport, in a car. Not often do people walk or cycle nowadays into work. Get to work, you might sit down. Get home from work, there's so much entertaining media available on TV or games consoles. It's actually fun to sit down at home as well. And the problem with these activities is a low level of energy expenditure. Up, not up, moving around, you're not going to be burning any calories, expending any energy. But the take-home message that I want to get across today is that being sedentary is distinctly different from not being physically active. Okay, so sedentary behaviours essentially are in a sitting or reclined position and their energy expenditure is low, typically below 1.5 metabolic equivalents. Right. And this is completely different to moderate to vigorous physical activity or exercise. We know that involves a higher amount of energy expenditure. Okay. And the way they're different, if someone's physically inactive, they're not meeting the government guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week. Okay. But someone could easily meet that within a week, get 150 minutes of exercise in, and might do 250, 350 minutes. Right. But outside of that time, they might be spending the rest of their days sitting down. Okay. And I'll tell you why that's important in a couple of slides' time. Over the past, say, 5-6 decades, this is becoming more and more prevalent. Okay. And people still do get in their exercise quite often. Right. Over the last couple of decades, it's been drilled home that we need to get people regularly active, 150 minutes per week, moderate vigorous activity. That's our current UK guideline anyway. So people can make time for that during their normal week. Okay. It's only maybe half an hour, 5 days a week. That's pretty simple, it's attainable. It might not be in some individuals, or a lot of individuals that aren't very well motivated, okay, but the individuals that might get to the gym, might go out for a run in the morning before work, they could probably quite quite easily accumulate their 150 minutes of activity. Right, that's fine, that's good, that'll have health benefits for definite. But what we're interested in now is what's happening outside of this 30-minute time period. Okay, so get up, sit down for breakfast, you might sit down, go into work, get to work, sit down all day, even at your lunch break, sit and have your lunch at a desk, or go to the canteen, sit down there, have your lunch, go home from work, sitting down. In the evening, cook your meal, you might be standing up for that, then you'll sit down and eat it for a longer period. After your meal, watch some TV, go to bed. Right. Exercise, you might fit that in before you go to work, you might fit it in after work. But there's still another 15 and a half hours here where we've got to consider, well, what is that doing to the body? What is all that sitting time doing to the body? And this is some population-wide data. These are from a mix of individuals, working, non-working, a mix of employment types. Okay, not just office-based individuals. This covers everybody. Sedentary time, just over 9 hours per day. Light intensity activity, so this might be slow walking or standing up, 6.5 hours a day. Moderate to vigorous activities, less than 1 hour a day, half an hour to 1 hour. So what is all this doing to us? Well, for one, energy expenditure is going to be very, very low over the course of the whole day. Energy expenditure loss at work over the last few decades has been on average 175 kilocalories per day. Which is not surprising because labour-intensive jobs have been taken over by machinery and we've got loads of technologies making work much less labour-intensive. Okay, so it makes sense really. Fortunately, that has coincided with a reduction in physical activity in the same time period, about 20%. And some researchers have estimated that by 2030 the reduction might be 35% from what we were at around about 1960. Okay. Furthermore, these individuals a few years ago published a study that they showed the average UK individual, the amount that they walked per year was reduced by 60 years every single year over the last few decades. Sorry, it's reduced by 60 miles every year over the last few decades. And coinciding with that, we haven't seen a reduction in the amount of energy people consume. So we might be burning a lot less energy, but we haven't reduced the amount we're eating to balance it out. So in essence, we might end up being in a constant state of energy surplus, which of course, over time, can lead to weight gain. So if we don't use up our excess calories, they're going to be stored as fat. So that gives you a nice lead-in to why this might be an issue in terms of weight management, right, and overweight and obesity prevention. But it goes a lot further beyond that. It's not just an issue of weight management. Okay. So you guys at the moment, this is your muscular activity. Okay. Sitting down in the chair. Right, so get up and stand. Just stand nice and still. Good. I heard not anyone wants to stand in the last session. There you go, got you up already. Right, just standing still, your muscular activity increases quite a bit. Your muscles still need to contract to keep your balance and your posture. Okay. Now do a few steps, if you can, if there's space. You can see these sharp spikes in your activity now. Okay? A little bit more onerous for yourselves. Good. I want you to sit back down now. Okay? You might get a chance to stand later on. Sit back down. So, if we're contracting our muscles a lot less over the day, and we look at our muscular activity pattern on a graph like this, it's not going to be very satisfying for individuals to see a straight line for most of the day. Right? And aside from it not being very satisfying to look at, it's actually going to impose on a number of other health markers, aside from expended energy. So this is one of the first large-scale studies that was published to show that this muscular inactivity over the course of the day increases risk of health outcomes, adverse health outcomes. So these guys From Australia, they've been the pioneers in this type of research. What they looked at was the amount of TV viewing time individuals spent. This TV viewing time data is the first indication that we got that excess sitting was distinctly a risk factor for different diseases. And what they showed is that the individuals who sat for more than 4 hours a day had a significantly higher increased risk of all-cause mortality. They're 46% higher than the other two groups. And the bit of putting capitals and bold at the bottom is the bit that I think is really, really important. This increased risk persisted regardless of the amount of time the individuals spent exercising. So regardless of the amount of time they spent in exercising at a moderate intensity or higher. It was also regardless of the amount of body fat they had. Also regardless of the amount of energy intake they had. And so they adjusted for these factors in their statistics and showed that this is the resulting increased risk. Quite alarming. And that spiked a lot of research from that year onwards. And I want to show you here that I'll talk you through this graph, but essentially showing the same thing. And this is in a clinical population. So these are in adults with cardiovascular disease or diabetes. And tracked individuals over a number of years and looked at how many deaths occurred, essentially, according to their sitting time and their physical activity level. And the important bits are the red bars, okay, sticking up. Right, and what that depicts is individuals who sat for more than 11 hours on average per day. And you can see in the individuals, so on the x-axis along the bottom, this is grouped by amount of physical activity they did. So no physical activity, these individuals were meeting or exceeding the physical activity guidelines, and these were doing a heck of a lot more. The individuals that done no activity on average per day, if they sat for longer, their risk of mortality went up. That's probably expected. But one thing we didn't expect to find is that in the individuals who met or exceeded the physical activity guidelines, even though they were getting their 150 minutes per week or more, if they sat for 11 hours or more, their risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mortality shot up. Still went up a lot. So starting to see now that it's really important that we don't just focus on the amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity individuals do. We also need to be focused on how much sitting they're doing as well. This is a review study that was published only 4 years ago. And these are all the studies that have been done to date that looked at sedentary behaviour or sitting specifically and a risk of an adverse health outcome. And each square up here represents a different study. Okay. These blue squares, only 4 studies found that there was no association between sitting time and a health outcome. Right. The orange ones, or yellow, whatever colour you think it is, right, there was associations, but they were influenced somewhat by the amount of body fat or the gender of the population that they were looking at. And all these ones in red mean that regardless of any other factors that they considered, there's an increased risk of a certain health outcome from sitting for too long. Okay, so they've got weight problems, diabetes, there's some cancers as well. We have an increased risk from a lot of sitting, cardiovascular diseases and mortality, whether it's from anything or a cardiovascular disease. So that's quite convincing evidence there. But this picture here is quite a nice way of viewing how someone might be active, okay, but also a couch potato. So this is what we call an active couch potato. You might call it something else, that's up to you. Right. But what we're looking at here is all the blue, right, the dark blue, they're being sedentary. They're either sitting or laying down, not expending much energy. Right? And I should say this doesn't include sleeping time. Right? That is good for you. Okay? Right, if there's any waking activity we're looking at. It's all the blue, being sedentary, sitting down. Then you've got the yellow and the red. And you can see some scattered about, and actually, this individual is achieving their physical activity guidelines on this day. Right? They're getting there half an hour. Right? But the amount of time that they've spent sedentary, 71% of all the time they've been awake. So we've heard the phrase couch potato a lot, but now we might be looking at people, are you an active couch potato? Possibly. I'm not sure it'll catch on for a while, right, but we'll see. Okay. So it's good evidence then to suggest that people sitting for prolonged periods of time, right, more than 4 hours watching TV or more than 11 hours sitting doing anything over the day, it's going to increase the risk of disease, regardless of the amount of exercise someone does. So what are you going to do about it? You're not going to engage in a half-hour exercise bout every couple of hours over the course of the day. Okay. But, importantly, you can do just little bouts of activity, and it has a massive impact. Okay. So, this study, they looked at individuals who broke their sitting time up over the course of the day. And I'm not going to say by how much yet, right? But over the course of the day, they broke it up by just a couple of minutes of activity. And later on we can discuss what type of activity that might be. And these are just a couple of the parameters that I pulled out of this paper that they examined. There's other metabolic risk markers as well. But in the individuals that had the most amount of breaks in sedentary time, their waist circumference was 6 centimetres lower than individuals who had pretty much no breaks in their sedentary time over the course of the day. And we can see the glucose response to a glucose challenge is also better the more you break up your sitting time. Okay. So that then primes someone to do an experimental study. I'll talk you through this in a second, I'm going to get a drink. How are we doing on the timer?
Just 16 minutes.
Alright,
14 minutes to go.
So this study on the left, and this figure came from a study that was published in 2012. Okay, so only 3 years ago. It was the first study that got some individuals into a laboratory and actually tightly controlled what they did over a period of 6 hours. This was. And I'll talk you through briefly what they did here. Okay, so in the first couple of hours, I got them in, sat them down, and after 2 hours, they fed them a drink. Okay, it was 75 grams carbohydrate and 50 grams of fat, right, like a mixed milkshake and glucose load. Then what they did was observe them over the next 5 hours. They split them into 3 different conditions here. So the blue line, is uninterrupted sitting. So they basically were told, sit there, limit your movement. Right, and they've done stuff like read books, work on a laptop, but minimise your movement, only getting up to go to the loo basically. In the other 2 conditions, they performed 2 minutes of walking every 20 minutes over that 5-hour period. They did that either at a light intensity, which in this study was 3.2 kilometres per hour, or a moderate intensity, which ranged between 6.5 to 8 kilometres per hour. Right. And what you can see there, with the conditions where they use activity breaks, actually the lines are very, very similar. So what they observed is that the glucose response here, it didn't matter whether you'd done moderate intensity or light intensity walking. Right, as long as you broke up your sitting time, with these regular short activity bouts, your glucose can be suppressed over the course of 5 hours. And that meant actually 24% lower glucose response in that 5 hours. And that was matched by a 31% reduction in insulin as well over those 5 hours. Okay, so that was really interesting data that many researchers got hold of for, well, that's real surprising. Can we look at other ways, other bout durations, other frequency of bouts in terms of breaking up someone's sitting time and see if it's effective? This study was published only last year, and they didn't look at breaking up sitting time, but they wanted to look at how standing could be used instead. So it was standing replacing sitting time. And they observed, I think it's some estate agents, they got into an office of an estate agents, they agreed to take part in this study, and on 2 separate afternoons, they observed these office workers either sat at their desk as normal, or on the other afternoon they put in a load of standing desks. Okay, so they were stood up during their time instead. Right, and in the blue line, so that's the seated afternoon. Again, we're looking at glucose. You can see over the course of the day, this glucose response is a lot higher compared to when they were standing. Right, and interestingly, even though they were standing, they didn't actually move away from their desk any more than when they had their normal seated desks. So the researchers knew that this response was just from them standing at their desk. So that could be a potentially really easy practical way of impacting on a lot of people in the country, possibly. So that pretty much nearly halved glucose response over the course of that afternoon. Okay. So, just to sum up what we've discussed so far, it's pretty clear now, and it's widely accepted that high amounts of sedentary time or sitting increases risk of disease and mortality. Breaking up sitting time lowers disease risk. So what we now need to consider is how can we achieve that practically in the real world? That's quite a tough question to ask. And there's a lot of studies now coming out that are looking at different protocols or different ways, strategies to break up sitting time. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of laboratory experiments that I've got my research group doing at the moment, just here in our labs. So we copied, in a way, this study here. Right. And here you can start to decipher what might be a good way to break up sitting time, what might not. We use exactly the same protocol as this study by David Dunstan, his name was. And we use the uninterrupted sitting protocol. We use the sitting and light intensity walking protocol, but instead of doing a moderate intensity breaks protocol as well, we decided what's going to happen if you get an individual just to stand for those 2 minutes every 20 minutes. Because based on this, we thought that might work, might be effective. But actually, we found that standing still for 2 minutes every 20 minutes isn't actually effective, any more effective than uninterrupted sitting, which was quite an interesting finding to us. But that then asks questions, and you then go and design another study to ask some different questions. And I suppose also it'd be important to know here the type of people that they actually done these studies on. Okay, so in this study that I presented up here, these guys were older adults, so they were, remember, 55 to 65 years old, and they were overweight or obese as well. So we saw quite a big reduction here in their glucose response over that time period. The study that I done last year, we got physically active, healthy males in. Okay, so like some of you guys out here, almost you guys, physically active. So they're all doing more than 150 minutes per week. And some of them were actually doing a lot more than that. Some of them were quite good standard rugby players, a couple of them. And even in those individuals, we showed that breaking up sitting time with light intensity walking suppressed their glucose levels quite a bit. And there's a number of studies now being published in different types of population subgroups. And I think I've only come across one or two over the last few years that have showed that their breaking up sitting protocol hasn't been effective. So I think that's quite important, so we can affect all of these different populations using pretty much the same strategy. Okay, quite important. And it's something that I took home and that a lot of other staff members have taken home with them, and I'll show you a couple of pictures later on to show you what they're doing. All right. But I suppose before we talk about that, we're going to discuss now what practical strategies can we actually use to get people sitting less. So if we take the active couch potato figure that you saw a little while ago, that individual, we might also term them a prolonger. Okay, so they engage in prolonged sitting. So here we've got thick, chunky green sections. That's a time when the individual has been sedentary, sitting down. Okay. on the right, we can call this person a breaker, because we don't get anywhere near as many thick, chunky, sedentary green sections. So this individual is quite often getting up, moving around, breaking up their sitting time. So what we want to try to do is change the prolongers into breakers and come up with strategies that they can use to incorporate that into their work, into their leisure time as well. So, from what I've spoken about already, I'll stop there actually. Have you got any questions so far? I was supposed to say at the beginning, stop me and ask questions at any point throughout the session. No, that's fine. Have any of you heard about this in the media today? There's been a couple of news articles online and on the TV recently by BBC, ITV, talking about prolonged sitting in the office in particular, and also trying to get into schools and getting the kids to stand up more often. So, is this news to you? Is this new?
It's not as shocking. It's more shocking than I thought.
Yeah, okay, so it's obviously no big news that a lot of people are sitting down a lot, and that's pretty obvious. But the statistics that I put up early on, okay, show, for example, 150% increased risk of diabetes, and those kinds of figures are pretty staggering. And pretty much every month now, there's a new paper coming out to say, you can increase your risk of this disease by this much. There's some Japanese group showing that the risk of cataracts substantially increased in people that sit for prolonged periods, which is really surprising. Now, I'm not sure why that happens. We don't know much about that at the moment. But there's a number of cancers as well. And aside from all of that, particularly applicable to office workers, we have the musculoskeletal problems as well. So what I'm focusing on today is cardiometabolic disease, really. But sitting down for long periods, people say, I'm getting neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain, and we're all focused on, well, that's because of how you're sitting. But it's not really, it's how long you're sitting for. And the same, we now know that the same applies to your risk of cardiovascular diseases, diabetes and cancers as well. So there's going to be a shift over the next year or so in looking at workplace and trying to get people to engage in less sitting to reduce their disease risk, not just their musculoskeletal pains. But the office probably is a good starting point, because that is the ideal environment for people to be sat down for a long period. And yet, you think you can't really get away from it. Actually, there's a lot of good ideas coming out now to suggest you can. So if we were focusing on office workers, this is typical workplace sitting in those types of individuals. They might work 33.5 hours a week. They might work 37.5 hours per week. Actually spend 33.5 hours of that time sitting. That can equate to over 1,500 hours per year, pretty much 67 full days of sitting. Remember, this is just at work, not considering what they do outside of work. That can equate to 75,500 hours of sitting during a working life. 8.6 years. Okay? So if someone works in an office, you can spend 8.6 years of your working life, your working time, sat down. Okay? We now know that it has a substantial impact upon your health. And this isn't surprising here. Exercise during working hours, tiny fraction of what they're doing over the working day. Light activity, 20%, sedentary, 76%. What we think is important now is to focus on this green area. Can we get individuals doing more of this, more of the light intensity activity? We've already shown that really slow walking or quite long duration standing can suppress glucose levels. So can we get office workers or other individuals doing that more throughout the course of the day? Possibly. And this is just to remind you, it doesn't apply just to office workers. This pie chart I put up earlier applies to all individuals, right? All adult working and non-working individuals. That's the average amount of sitting time. Yeah. Does So how's that timer? Am I about to start talking
You've got
about
just under a minute.
Just under a minute. Alright, we'll assume that it's gone off now. Okay? So that's half an hour since I started. What we now consider to be a prolonged bout of sitting is for half an hour or more. Okay? So for every half hour, you should get up and at least move around for a minute or 2 minutes. Okay? So get up. Alright. Now it's up to you what you want to do. You can stand there, have a stretch, move around. Okay? A couple of minutes. Alright. Yeah, go on. Do some stair climbing. Great idea. I'll have another drink. Very strongly.
Okay, now I'm starting.
So when I've done this with, I've done a talk like this with my third year students. After we have a couple of minutes break for them to get on their feet, said to them you can either sit down or carry on standing. In that room we were in a lot better lecture theatre. You could stand quite well and not block other people's views. So it's completely up to you whether you want to get sat back down again or find somewhere to sit.
Plenty of room to spread out.
Yeah, there's plenty of room to spread out. That's up to you. Yeah. Now you know what might be happening with the glucose in your blood and your risk of diabetes. You might get up and stand. When I gave a similar talk to the rest of our department, we now have a lot of people that try and stand up a lot more. I'm not going to tell you how, because I want to see what ideas you guys might have for this. Okay. So just to carry on talking about the office workers, this was an expert statement that was published only a couple of weeks ago. So I assume you're familiar with position stands from ACSM, things like that. Well, this is pretty much the equivalent. So this was commissioned by Public Health England. They wanted a group of researchers to get together and come up with an expert statement on reducing sedentary time in the office. Would you mind if I asked you just to come and stand a bit closer so I don't have to project my voice a bit as much? Stand up, but just a bit closer. There we go. My girlfriend will be happy when I get home and I can't talk. So, based on the evidence that we've got to date, it's a limited amount because we've only been researching this for a few years. But what they suggest is that people in the office workplace, they should steadily progress to accumulate, at least 2 hours a day of standing or light activity. During a 7.5, 8 hours working day, 2 hours of that, they should try to be stood up or moving around. And this isn't targeted towards employees, this is targeted towards people who employ office workers as well. And if you are engaged in seated-based work, regularly break it up, standing-based work and the other way around. And they'd recommend that you might use sit-stand desks or height-adjustable desks, whatever you want to call them. Okay. But it probably is important to state, if you are using them, it's very important that you mix up your posture. Don't stand all day, because that might cause problems down lower in the leg. Okay, it could also cause back problems. The important thing is to regularly adjust your posture. That's the link there. I think this is being made available to all the presentations. So that's the link there to this expert statement. And that was the first one that's been published globally. First global guidelines of reducing set time. And I expect that this will prime a lot of research and more will come out. Oh, I don't want to exit. That's a good time actually to stop you there, and because I didn't want to go on to the next slide. Okay. So I want you guys now just to have a discussion, amongst a few of you around you. Just come up with some strategies that you think would work. We're going to focus on the workplace to start with. Okay, an office workplace. How could you try and start progressing to that 2 hours of light intensity activity? Right. So I'll give you a few minutes to discuss, to see if you can come up with a couple of ideas each. So, and you can't use sit-stand desks. Alright, that's already taken.
That's the office.
Just have a timer. It goes off every second. Yeah. Do a lap around the office.
Yeah, what about you? Change town. That's what they've got where I work now. Corporate.
Yeah,
It's got that where we are now. It's 20-minute walk. Yeah, especially when it's been hot. Be mindful, dehydrated, things like that. I work with Barclays. Back to Cheshire. So, limited first place of time. One of my clients at work switched. Yeah. That's quite interesting. Workplace housing provider as well. He works for himself. So he works for himself. Yeah. Things like but he is struggling to shift away. 3%.
You think of each come up with a couple?
Gets you a certain level of activity. Gets you.
We've got a few.
Yeah.
Good, good. Well, I've heard a couple of interesting ones, I think. Okay. Start over in the right then. So, you guys, just give us one.
What did we have? So we said instead of emailing or phoning people in the same office, you can only go and talk to people in the same office.
Yeah, that's great. I get probably 100 emails a day. 100 emails a day. And yeah, probably half of them are from people I work with that are either in the same corridor, same building or same office. Yeah, get up and talk to me. Yeah. Likewise, if you're going to send an email to someone, you could just go and walk and speak to them instead. Especially if you know they're written. Go and speak to them. Alright, good. You guys?
Kind of like an alarm to, do a bit of a desk swap. So after a certain amount of time, like an alarm will go off and you've got to switch desks.
Yeah, good. So you can use your own timer. There's even software and apps available now that come up and will flash up on your screen. Say you need to get up and move around now.
Well, the iWatch, I know Rick Crawford's got his iWatch, he keeps showing it off, but it
Yeah,
actually tells him to stand up now and again. When
Yeah.
he's been sedentary for a long time, it's detected lack of movement and it says stand up. So randomly he will just stand up in a meeting.
Exactly.
And we just look at him a little bit weirdly, but then we all stand up as well.
That's an important point. If you go to a conference like this, or if you're in meetings and you get up and stand, or you start standing and stand the whole session, you look odd. Yeah, it's not accepted, really. It's not an accepted norm. So what we're going to try and do is build it to be normal. That's what we want to try and do with these types of strategies. You guys?
We had one where if it's possible for your meetings and you've got much equipment, which is to catch up somebody that you go out for a walk.
Great. Easy. How many meetings do you have a day? You know, you might have a few on some days, or a lot on some days, and most of them are spent sat down at a table. Why not get a clipboard? Or an iPad, or whatever, a tablet? Yeah, go and walk around. You could easily, I think you could easily like knock up a kilometre.
Yeah, our building that we work in, so it's
Yeah. And actually, the evidence suggests that if you have standing up meetings, you're a lot more productive and you get through your points a lot quicker. Stay more focused on things. Good. You guys, another different one?
Maybe it's like break areas, so you can't have your break at your desk. Different areas that you go
Yeah.
to.
Good. So, compulsory, but you're not allowed to have your lunch at your desk. Yeah. Go somewhere else. Yeah. Go maybe in the canteen, have some standing desks where people can eat and stand. So the Gateway building is just opposite, that way, just opposite us. That's brand new, only opened a few months ago. There's only one desk in that whole building where you stand up and eat. Yeah. Why? You know, have a lot more. Yeah, it's simple things like that. So good, and these are quite easy things to do, aren't they? You're not asking someone to get on a treadmill and run for half an hour. You're not asking them to go to the gym or go out and be self-conscious because they're in their gym gear and stuff like that. Not asking them to buy any equipment. Simple things. Okay? And these are some other potential ways. There'll be some that you've spoken about, others that are pretty simple as well. Don't have a printer at each desk, have one per office and locate it further away. We used to have one, I used to have one next to my desk, now our printer is outside of our office. So they have to get up and go. Don't have personal bins, I don't have a bin. So every time I want to put something in the bin, I have to get up and go out the corridor. Okay. I think, did I hear someone saying about getting up for phone calls or something like that? If you're on the phone, be on your feet. Okay, that's quite simple. And another one that's good, and I've heard people have used in studies in different offices, is every time someone stands up, you stand up. Yeah. Or every time someone walks into the office, you stand up. Okay. So that could be quite a bit of fun, as well as being good for your health.
It's traditional, isn't it? It's what used to happen.
Yeah, get back to tradition. Okay. Stand up, salute them, whatever. Okay. Another thing, you might want to get a small glass, and you have to refill it more. And also, if you drink more over the day, well, that's good for you. It also makes you go to the toilet more. Then you might want to pick toilets that are further away. So this is an example of a height adjustable desk. Or if you work opposite me in the office and your employer won't give you a height adjustable desk, you might make one yourself out of books, which my colleague Bryna has done here. So she's someone that's really taken to this research and been very conscious of what she does in terms of her posture during the day. And this is an example of software that you can download to use. And one, I can't remember which bit of software, but there's one that actually blocks and freezes your screen for the time that you set it to. So it might block your screen for a minute or 2 minutes. Okay, so you have, and then well, you can't work, so you might as well get up and do something else. Okay, so this released again. And I think what's really important, and these are some more you can read while I'm talking, right, is to emphasise that even though you might be moving away from your desk a bit more, and some people are under the impression that this might actually impact negatively on someone's productivity, the amount of work they do. All the evidence to date suggests it has no benefit, it has no effect on your work productivity, or it improves how productive you are. Okay, that's really important, and that's how we're going to sell it to the office employees. Okay. Do these strategies work? This is just an example. The study published recently, pretty much the first study that's looked at reducing sitting time via an intervention in the office place. And they use all of these, many of these strategies you've just seen on the last couple of slides that you've suggested as well. And this is before the intervention. Right, this is the amount of sitting time. So this is the comparison group. So this group did nothing. They didn't have an intervention. Right, before the intervention, they sat for that amount of time per day, nearly 600 minutes. After the intervention, didn't really change. The individuals that were guided and advised on all of these different strategies, they reduced their daily sitting time by 76 minutes a day. Okay, that is a heck of a lot. Right, and see up here, they use height adjustable desks, hence the quite large increase in standing time. Right, and this is over 8 weeks, this study was. Okay, so it was 4 weeks. Okay, they've then done this study again, 8 weeks on a larger population, and showed that it was still effective. And they're now doing a study using the government in Australia over hundreds of individuals. If that's then effective, we'll be pretty confident that the intervention they use is good, a good way to go. So that's at work. We also need to think, well, not everybody has an office job. So what about the individuals that aren't working in the office? Some individuals, of course, are up on their feet all day as part of their job. That's great. Yeah, most of you probably. Yeah, that's great. Disease risk is going to be very much lower. Okay. But there are elderly individuals, individuals at school, people that are unemployed, and people who are in other type of job domains where they're not at a desk all day but still sitting down. So what can we do? Well, instead of you going to your dog and saying it's walk time, your dog might come to you. Yeah. Do well to train your dog to do that. As we've seen on Britain's Got Talent, anything is possible with an animal. Alright. So what you need to do, what you might want to do with clients or friends, family, whoever you're going to take this to, is first make them aware of the risks of sitting. And over the last year or so, I've probably had about 15 or 20 different postcards like this come through via an email, someone or another, identifying in a nice, illustrative way, different risks that accompany this prolonged sitting. So you might sit down with one of these cards and say, look, this is the amount that your risk might increase at this health outcome. Or If you're standing up, you could burn an extra 50 calories per hour. That would probably be a lot more motivating to many people that you deal with. But for that, cut your risk cancer by up to 25% if you stand a lot more than you sit. So that could be possibly quite useful. You might try and use these 3 strategic themes when you're tackling this problem with an individual. To stand up, try and get them to stand up at least every 30 minutes. Don't sit for 30 minutes or more without having got up. And either just got up or moved around and done something. Don't sit for less than 30 minutes. And then just move more throughout the day. Do everything you can to move around. Right. It doesn't have to be really structured. It could just be simple things like you've spoken about at the office. And at home, these might be strategic ways to get individuals to reduce their sitting time in their normal leisure time. Okay. So again, we've got stand up during the phone calls, having bins only in one room. Some people might still throw it on the floor. Hopefully most people go down to the kitchen or out to the kitchen and put the rubbish in there. Lawn and garden work, household chores. So a lot of people like to blitz the household chores in one go. I used to. Now I try and break it up over the course of the day. Maybe if I'm at home at the weekend, I might do a bit of washing up, then go and sit down if that's what I'm going to do, and then get up and put some washing up, something like that, or go and hang it up. And maybe not do it all in one go, spread it out over the course of the day, so then you're not sitting down for prolonged periods. Outside the home, the common one that we always talk about in terms of exercise, use the lift. Yeah, that's an easy one. Biking, commuting, on your feet, walk the dog more often. Now, these are quite often things that you associate to moderate intensity activity, which is fine, you can meet your government guidelines that way, but also it's a good way to try and reduce the sitting time. And you just spoke about these earlier, so your clients, whatever, they might want to get hold of an app just for free, an Apple Watch, something like that. You can get, these are pretty cheap now, it's a type of device, pop it on your wrist and they'll vibrate. You can set it, sometimes, some of them you can set to vibrate however often you want, 15 minutes, half an hour, and they can be quite good and stimulating tools to get up and move around. So, a couple of take-home messages on the last slide. I suppose one I probably should have highlighted and put in bold, underlined, put a circle around it, is avoid prolonged sitting periods. Okay? Try and stand up more, sit less, move more often as well. Okay? So, that's that. Right, thanks for listening, thanks for standing for the second half.